I don't know what Hegseth is saying. And I never know what Trump really means because he changes what he says.
He may not know what he means. That's the problem.
Yeah. So it's very hard to know. And, these guys talk about a deal. The deal is the second phase, right? The actual peace agreement, where you deal with the nuclear issue, the question of who controls the strait, the overall package of sanctions, and so forth and so on. That will all be dealt with once you get a ceasefire in place and you can sit down and have serious negotiations. The problem we face here is we can't even get a ceasefire. It looked like we had all the ingredients for a ceasefire. It looked like the Pakistanis were working to, free up the $24 billion in Iranian assets, and that we had solved that problem, and therefore all four problems were solved. It looked like Trump might get Netanyahu and Hezbollah to stop shooting at each other. So it looked like we had the makings of a deal that would create a ceasefire, but not a final agreement. And then it all went up in smoke with the shooting down of this Apache. Trump could have handled that in a variety of different ways, but he chose to go up the escalation ladder. And Danny, the first question that pops into my head when I see what's happening is, why do these people in the administration think that they're going to win by going up the escalation ladder? Trump talks about the fact that the Iranians don't have a lot of air defenses, which means that a lot of our aircraft and Tomahawk missiles can attack Iran and pretty much get a free ride in the process. I think there's a lot of truth in that. But what he misses is that Iran has a significant offensive capability of its own, built around drones and missiles, both cruise missiles and especially ballistic missiles. Those ballistic missiles are numerous, they are deadly accurate, and they've already done an enormous amount of damage to American military installations in the region. And, we are here in a target-enriched environment, and in a target-rich environment where the Iranians have lots of accurate missiles. How do you go up the escalation ladder and beat them? And by the way, Trump is now beginning to talk about, taking Karg, taking over Iranian oil and so forth and so on. If he goes down that road, what he's going to find is that the Iranians are going to retaliate against the flow of Saudi oil into the Red Sea. They're going to attack against the flow of UAE oil out of the Sea of Oman, and it's just going to lead to no good. We have no interest in, further escalating this war, because escalating the war militarily not only does not produce victory, but it makes the economic situation worse. The reason that Trump is desperate to solve this war as we're moving into the fourth month is because of the economic consequences and the fact that all sorts of people are telling him this one only gets worse with the passage of time. Okay, it gets worse with the passage of time, therefore you better shut it down ASAP. But instead, we're going up the escalation ladder in the mistaken belief that by doing so, we gain more coercive leverage. I actually think that's not true. As you know, I've argued for a long time. What's happening now, continuation of the war, escalation of the war is in Iran's interest. I don't think what's happening now is not in Iran's interest. Iran has a vested interest in prolonging this war and accelerating the speed at which we head towards the cliff, towards the precipice at the economic level. So I think if anything, President Trump is in a deep hole, and what he's doing is he's digging faster and deeper.
You took some of the words right out of my mouth here on some of the changes, because we talked about what had been on the table and what people had been saying in the administration about what our objectives were, et cetera. And then they have taken a big turn in the last 12 hours. Gary was showing you on the screen there a second ago what Trump put on Truth Social. But before we focus on that, let me show you something that was on Fox News last night by General Keith Kellogg.
Politically, we say stop the negotiations. Have our team come home, say, our phone number, give us a call. Economically, you take things like the Rock Island, which is the command and control facility in the Strait. You take Park Island, which is their economic lifeline. You tell the rest of the world, you're not going to get any oil because we now control the oil. We're now the oil barons.
But what do you make of that, first of all, that we want to not just take Cargill or not just hit it, but we want to take their oil and be like oil barons? What do you make of that? Because that is a little bit out there for me. It's a lot out there.
It's delusional, right? These are people who are desperate, right? People like Keith Kellogg helped get us into this war. He's been a cheerleader all along. And all the sort of viable strategies that people talked about turned out to be not very viable. And these people are desperate. So now they're talking about taking Carg Island. We talked about this once before. It makes no sense. The idea that you're going to take over Iranian oil, you're going to take over the Straits, and you're going to control the flow of oil into global markets from the Persian Gulf, and you're going to have all sorts of leverage over countries all over the planet like China. This is like crazy, right? We don't have the military capability to take over Iran's oil, to take over the Persian Gulf. It would be insane. And boots on the ground? Really? We don't have the military forces in the region to do that over any sustained period of time. I mean, maybe we can take an island for a brief period of time. We're talking about a huge country. It's a huge piece of real estate. They have, 93 million people? And furthermore, if you've ever looked at the terrain, during the Cold War, Danny, one of the contingencies that people like me who did security studies back then focused on was the question of the Soviet Union invading Iran. This is after 1979. Remember, in 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and you also had a revolution in Iran where Iran was greatly weakened. So all sorts of people looked at the question of, how easy it would be for the Soviet Union to invade Iran, come through the Zagros Mountains and go down to Khuzestan and so forth and so on. And almost everybody understood very quickly that the terrain in Iran was forbidding, to put it mildly. This is not like conquering Poland, which is a flat country, sandwiched in between Russia / the Soviet Union, Germany, and Austria, that was conquered and disappeared from the map on many occasions. The geography here is forbidding, to put it mildly. And we don't have many ground forces. Trump's not going to put serious boots on the ground. So all this talk about, basically conquering Iran and bringing them to their knees is just crazy. And by the way, just on the whole timing dimension of this story, the economy, the international economy, is in trouble. It's in trouble. You can see interest rates going up in the United States, and everybody predicts that if we don't shut this down, they're going to go up faster and further, right? So you would think that Trump would be thinking about how to shut this one down, which seemed to be the direction he was moving in before Monday. However, he's now going up the escalation ladder. And you want to remember, the tougher he talks and the tougher his actions are, the more extensive will be the Iranian response. And as the Iranians respond, they will end up doing more and more damage. And that will hurt the flow of oil and other products out of the Persian Gulf, which will further exacerbate the problems we face in the international economy. So I, for the life of me, don't see how this is a war-winning strategy.
You and I had talked many times in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war over the last year or so since Trump has been inaugurated. We've often pointed out that whatever Trump is doing today very often has been the product of whoever was the last person to talk to him was before he made a statement. And then if somebody different went in the other ear, then he would come out in a different way the next day. That seems to be playing out here. So when this report anyway of a helicopter being shot down, initially it wasn't shot down. Initially it was just it went down. That was, and CENTCOM wasn't saying anything, so we just knew that a helicopter went down. President Trump was asking immediately after it, and his comment was, "It's no big deal. I'm not really worried about it." That's what he said initially. And then, of course, we know something happened later that now all of a sudden it's a major deal, and we're going to strike 20 targets. We all know with that. Well, I just showed you Keith Kellogg talking to Trump last night, and then this morning, President Trump said this.
And they're getting decimated, just decimated, and they're dying to make a deal. They want to make a deal so badly, and they're really in submission. They just don't know it yet. Okay, to be honest with you, they just don't know it yet. And we are talking to them and all. But, look, my preference has always been take Cargill.
Yeah, so I'm just going to take Cargill. And then back to that Truth Social in there, he also adds, we're going to take their oil infrastructure and assume control of the oil and gas markets. Almost verbatim what Keith Kellogg had said the night before. And Trump had not even mentioned Cargill or the oil for months. So what do you make of that? Because that concerns me.
Well, I think there's no question that there are a handful of people who are around Trump who make the kinds of arguments that General Kellogg does. And you're probably right. I don't have any hard facts, but you're probably right that the last person who speaks to him matters a lot, and what he says from time to time. And probably someone like Keith Kellogg talked to him and told him that we do have a magic formula, and that magic formula is to take Cargill Island, take control of the Strait, take control of Iranian oil, and use that leverage to bring the Iranians to their knees. And by the way, send a clear message to countries like China and countries all over the world that we are basically in charge of the supply of the world's oil, and people have to dance to our tune. This is the way a lot of people seem to think these days. And as I emphasize ad nauseum, what strikes me about all of this is that people who should know better have no sense of the limits of military power. They just think that, the United States has this incredibly powerful military. It can do almost anything it wants with it and get its way. And as you and I know very well, we do have impressive military power, but there are real limits to what you can do with that military power. As we found out a long time ago in Vietnam, as we found out a long time ago in Afghanistan, and as we're now finding out in Iran, there are just limits to what you can do.
Yeah, there are, and you can at least partially forgive somebody who doesn't know anything about military affairs or how wars function, as whatever, and they just hear bumper stickers like we're the most powerful military in the history of the world. You can forgive them for thinking, oh, well, yeah, Iran's a lot smaller of a country and a lot smaller of a military. Surely we can take them. But as you suggested, it's something different and worse when it's somebody who should know better, i.e. a four-star general like Jack Keane.
Even if they sign on a dotted line and we get everything we want on paper, what are they going to do in terms of implementation? They're going to stall it. And then they're going to attempt to reverse it. I do believe we're likely on a path to return to major combat operations. And that will put the regime on a path to its collapse. What do we do about Cargill Island? The president indicated today he would prefer to take it, kind of the Venezuelan model. If we took control of it, it would only be on a temporary basis. And we would be working eventually with a government that we could work with and return control to them because it is their oil. If we don't get a deal, it seems to me we're going back to major combat operations, which in my mind is the preferred option anyway. If we can get this regime to give up their predatory nature, take away their offensive capability to do that, force the collapse of the regime at some point, the strategic opportunity to reset the Middle East for generations to come is there. That is still all possible.
Now, if that had been said by Benjamin Netanyahu, I would have understood where it was coming from because he wants to reset the Middle East. That's exactly what Netanyahu wants. But coming from General Keane, he should surely know that we don't have the military capacity together with Israel to compel that, or we would already have done it. So what do you make of why he keeps saying this? And I'll tell you why it worries me is because just like I showed you, Kellogg said what he said last night, and then Trump echoed it the next morning. Before the first of these, what's now going to be 3 days of bombing started, Jack Keane went on Fox News again and said, I think we really need to go back to bombing because that's the only thing that's going to make these guys bring around. And now here he's done it. And if he's talking about Karg and all this other kind of stuff and taking over the oil, if he convinces Trump here to go down a path that militarily that you just laid out cannot succeed, where does that leave us after we try?
We'll just be in worse shape than we are today. Again, we're in a hole. We're in a deep hole. And what President Trump, who's in charge, is doing is he's digging faster and digging deeper. I don't know what else to say. The idea that we're going to get the Iranians to surrender, I think, is not a serious argument. We represent an existential threat to them. The United States and Israel are genocidal states that have their gun sights on Iran and want to destroy Iran. And President Trump says they're ready to submit. They just don't know that. What does that mean? I don't think they're ever going to know that. He may think they're ready to submit, but the fact that they don't know that tells you they're not ready to submit. And by the way, just with General Keane, he tells this story about the Americans are the good guys. President Trump is especially one of the good guys, and the Iranians are the bad guys. We can't trust them to implement an agreement. Well, I would point out that we had this agreement with the Iranians called the JCPOA, and it wasn't the Iranians who walked away from the deal. It was President Trump who walked away from the deal. Do you think the Iranians can trust President Trump? I don't.
And let me just add on there, on February the 26th, 2 days before war, we also had at least the outlines of a deal where Iran was willing to do stuff that was better than the JCPOA, and we threw that away too. Big, important point.
And let me add to that, Danny, that before the 12-day war last June, we were negotiating and making major progress on the same deal. And out of the blue, the Israelis, followed by us, struck Iran. So you gave one example. I gave two examples. Do you think the Iranians trust the United States? I don't think they trust the United States. Do you think anybody trusts the United States at this point in time? Do you think Vladimir Putin trusts the United States? I don't think so. I think everybody knows that you cannot trust the United States and you cannot trust Israel. But that's not the story that General Keane tells. He tells exactly the opposite. And I think that he's blowing smoke. I think there's no evidence to support his perspective. But then again, if we go back to the question of what the military consequences of going up the escalation ladder are, we simply don't have the capability to execute these strategies and win this war the way these two generals, General Kellogg and General Keane, think we can. And as you pointed out, and I think your point hits the nail right on the head. If this is the magic formula, we would have done it a long time ago. The fact that we've not done it so far tells you that it doesn't provide a way out of this disastrous situation that we find ourselves in.
So let me ask you something, Gary. Be ready to bring that full screen back up you just had there a second ago. I assume that's something that's breaking because I didn't see it earlier. The question is, if we go down this path, and whether we physically try to take Karg or bomb it, who knows what we may do. But since it's self-evident that it is not militarily attainable, so we can try, but we will fail. And then where will that leave us then? Because if we were in our fantasy minds thinking this will compel the Iranian side to have a better deal, you have Ghalibaf there. Gary, if you could pop that back up. This apparently is something he's just said here. He said, wrong strategies and impulsive decisions will reset the entire board for the worst, explode energy infrastructure and markets, and create endless quagmire that you will be stuck in for years. You will see a different Iran. Now, Ghalibaf is not just the speaker of the Iranian parliament. He's also, I understand, a former general. He's definitely a combat veteran, and is very closely tied with the IRGC. So I don't consider this empty bluster, that if we go against Karg Island, because I'm sure that's what that's in reference to. You see that's 11. That's about a little over an hour and a half ago. That's what he's going to say. So that would put us in a profoundly worse shape. Surely, even with the lust for war that Jack Keane, Keith Kellogg, Lindsey Graham, Mike Pompeo, ad infinitum, all that they want, yet they got to see that if we go down that path, we won't succeed, and it will worsen our situations Help me understand the mindset of these people.
I can't. I simply can't explain it, right? I mean, it just seems so obvious to me that educated people, and especially individuals like Generals Keane and Kellogg, who have been in the American military and in fact have been in the American Army, where you tend to have a more healthy appreciation of the limits of force than you do if you're in the Air Force, where you tend to think that air power is a magic bullet. I find it just inexplainable what's going on here. I don't know what these people are thinking. And I'm actually surprised that Trump himself hasn't figured out the advice that these people are giving him is bad advice. These were the people who got him into this war to begin with. You would think he would be scratching his head at this point and saying to himself, maybe I ought not to listen to these people who encouraged me to get into this war because they got me into a giant quagmire. And, if you think about their solutions for fixing this problem, they really don't sound that plausible. This is what you would expect. And you would expect him to be calling up advisors. I would imagine that J.D. Vance, who is a smart man, whatever you think of his policy views, has figured out what you and I have figured out, and that Trump would be relying heavily on someone like Vance, who, again, I would imagine understands this, but, the sort of mimic the words of Pete Hegseth and, listen to these two generals and Lindsey Graham. My God, when you listen to Lindsey Graham talk, you wonder what planet he's on, right? It's just not the way the world works. And as I've said many times, we have overwhelming evidence at this point in time, given all these escapades that we've been in, we have overwhelming evidence that their ideas hardly ever bear fruit. It seems like every war we get into, we lose.